Maya Carter was having a good day. She had just finished visiting her mother and was now driving home, enjoying the peaceful evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink. She turned on the radio, humming along to a song, completely unaware that trouble was just around the corner. As she drove through a quiet neighborhood, flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A police car was behind her, signaling her to pull over. Maya frowned but obeyed, pulling her car to the side of the road. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a red light. So why was she being stopped? She rolled down her window as the officer approached. It was a woman, tall and stern-looking, with sharp eyes that carried a sense of authority. The name tag on her uniform read Officer Reynolds. Without greeting Maya or explaining the reason for the stop, the officer immediately demanded her license and registration. Maya remained calm. She had been in law enforcement long enough to know her rights. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she asked politely. Officer Reynolds narrowed her eyes. "License and registration," she repeated, ignoring Maya's question. Maya sighed and reached into her glove compartment, retrieving the documents. She handed them over, watching as Reynolds scanned them quickly. Instead of returning them, the officer's expression hardened. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to you," she said, her tone dripping with doubt. "Where are you coming from?" Maya felt a twinge of annoyance, but kept her voice steady. "I'm coming from my mother's house, and this car is registered in my name, as you can see on the documents." Officer Reynolds didn't seem to care. She looked at Maya as if searching for something. An excuse, a reason to escalate the situation. Then, without warning, she ordered Maya to step out of the vehicle. Maya's instincts immediately kicked in. She had worked on enough cases to know when a situation was turning unfair. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. I would like to know why I need to step out of my car," she said firmly. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Step out now, or I will remove you myself," she snapped. Maya exhaled slowly. She could argue, but she also knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. She decided to cooperate, for now. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, keeping her hands visible. The moment she did, Officer Reynolds grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. Before Maya could even process what was happening, cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. "You're under arrest," the officer declared. Maya's heart pounded. Arrested? For what? She took a deep breath, her mind already working through the next move. Officer Reynolds had no idea who she had just put in handcuffs, and soon she would regret it. Maya stood still, her hands locked behind her back, feeling the weight of the cold handcuffs pressing against her wrists. She had been in difficult situations before, but never like this, never as the one being treated like a criminal. She remained calm, watching Officer Reynolds, who seemed pleased with herself. The officer grabbed Maya's arm and led her toward the police car. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Reynolds muttered under her breath. "Let's see how smart you are at the station." Maya could have spoken up, could have revealed her identity right then and there, but she didn't. She wanted to see how far this officer would take it. She had dealt with people like Reynolds before, those who judged others without knowing anything about them. As they reached the police car, Maya took a deep breath. "Officer, I think you're making a mistake," she said in a calm voice. Reynolds scoffed. "Oh, I don't think so." She opened the car door and guided Maya inside. "You people always have excuses." Maya held back a sigh. She had spent years training, working hard to serve her country, to uphold the law. And now she was sitting in the back of a police car for no reason. But she wasn't afraid. She knew something the officer didn't. This situation was about to take a very unexpected turn. The ride to the police station was quiet. Maya kept her eyes on the passing streets, memorizing every detail. She was patient. She knew how these things worked. Reynolds, on the other hand, seemed satisfied, occasionally glancing at Maya through the rearview mirror. When they arrived, Reynolds parked the car and pulled Maya out. The station was busy with officers moving around, processing other cases. Some of them gave Maya curious glances, but no one questioned Reynolds as she led her to the booking area. "Sit," Reynolds ordered as she unlocked the cuffs and pointed to a chair. Maya rubbed her wrists but followed the command. A different officer approached with a clipboard, ready to take her information. "Name?" he asked, not looking up. Maya straightened her posture. "Special Agent Maya Carter, FBI." Silence. Reynolds froze, her confident expression vanishing in an instant. The officer holding the clipboard looked up, his face turning pale. A few others in the station stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening in shock. Maya calmly reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge, placing it on the desk in front of her. "I'd like to speak to your chief," she said, her voice steady but firm. Reynolds took a step back, her mouth slightly open. She blinked as if trying to process what she had just heard. Maya leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Still think you haven't made a mistake?" Reynolds didn't answer. For the first time since the arrest, she looked unsure. And Maya knew this was only the beginning. The entire room fell silent. Officers who had been going about their business suddenly stopped, their eyes shifting between Maya and Officer Reynolds. The air grew thick with tension as the realization of what had just happened sank in. Reynolds' face lost its color. She blinked rapidly, as if hoping she had misheard. What did you just say?" she stammered. Maya remained calm, her sharp eyes fixed on the officer. She slowly picked up her badge and held it up for everyone to see. "I said I'm Special Agent Maya Carter. I work for the FBI." Murmurs spread through the room like wildfire. A few officers exchanged nervous glances, while others looked at Reynolds in disbelief. The man with the clipboard, who had been about to write Maya's name down, quickly set his pen aside. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his posture. Another officer, a tall man with graying hair and a serious expression, stepped forward. His badge read Lieutenant Harris. "Wait a minute," he said, rubbing his forehead. "You're saying you're with the FBI?" Maya nodded. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Harris turned to Reynolds, his expression shifting from confusion to frustration. "Officer Reynolds, did you run her ID before bringing her in?" Reynolds opened her mouth, then closed it again. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. I didn't think it was necessary," she finally muttered. Harris let out a sharp breath, clearly trying to keep his anger in check. "Didn't think it was necessary." He turned back to Maya. "Agent Carter, I sincerely apologize. Please allow me to clear this up." Maya stayed seated, her face unreadable. "I appreciate that, Lieutenant," she said. "But this isn't just about me. I want to know why I was pulled over in the first place." Reynolds quickly jumped in, trying to regain control. "She was driving suspiciously," she said, "and she refused to follow my orders." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Suspiciously? I was driving home from my mother's house. I asked why I was being stopped, and you refused to answer." Harris turned back to Reynolds, his patience wearing thin. "Is this true?" Reynolds shifted on her feet, looking for an escape. "I was just doing my job." Harris sighed and shook his head. "No, you weren't." He then gestured to another officer. "Get the chief in here. Now." Maya remained composed, but inside, she knew this was far from over. She wasn't going to let this slide. She had worked too hard, seen too much injustice, to just walk away without consequences. Reynolds, now visibly nervous, stepped back slightly. For the first time, she realized her actions had real consequences. And Maya was just getting started. The tension in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Officer Reynolds stood stiffly, her fingers twitching at her sides. It was clear that she had never expected this situation to turn against her. The other officers watched in silence, waiting for what would happen next. A door at the far end of the station swung open, and a tall man in his late 50s walked in. His uniform was crisp, and his expression was unreadable. The nameplate on his chest read Chief Dawson. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes landing on Maya. Then, they shifted to Reynolds. His face darkened. "What's going on here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the silence. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward. "Chief, we have a situation," he said. "This woman, Special Agent Maya Carter, was wrongfully arrested by Officer Reynolds." Dawson's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he remained calm. He turned to Maya. "Is this true?" Maya stood up from her chair, her posture strong and confident. She held out her FBI badge once again. "Yes, Chief. I was pulled over without reason, refused an explanation, and then arrested for simply asking why." The chief's jaw tightened. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know when a mistake had been made. And this was a big one. His gaze snapped to Reynolds. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice colder now. Reynolds swallowed hard. "Sir, I thought she was being uncooperative," she stammered. Dawson's eyes narrowed. "You thought? Did you run her ID? Did she commit any crime?" Reynolds hesitated. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room staring at her. "No, sir," she admitted finally. The chief exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." He turned to Maya, his expression sincere. "Agent Carter, I deeply regret what happened to you. This is not how we operate." Maya appreciated the apology, but she wasn't here just for words. "Chief Dawson, this isn't about just one bad decision. I need to know how many times this has happened before. How many other innocent people have been treated like this?" The room fell into another uneasy silence. No one wanted to answer that question. The chief cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Harris, I want a full review of Officer Reynolds' records. Every complaint, every questionable stop. I want the truth." Reynolds' eyes widened. "Sir." Dawson cut her off with a sharp look. "Enough. You've caused enough trouble for one day." He turned back to Maya. "Agent Carter, I assure you, this will be handled properly." Maya nodded, but inside, she knew this was far from over. She had seen too much in her career to believe that one investigation would fix everything. But this was a start. Reynolds, now pale and visibly shaken, realized she was no longer in control. The power she had misused was slipping away. And Maya, she wasn't going to stop until justice was served. A heavy silence filled the room. Officer Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, her confidence completely gone. She had walked into this situation thinking she had full control, but now everything had turned against her. The chief's stern face, the judging stares from her fellow officers, and the calm but powerful presence of Maya Carter made it clear she had made a serious mistake. Lieutenant Harris wasted no time. He walked over to a desk, pulled out a folder, and began typing into the computer. "I'm pulling up Reynolds' record now," he said, his voice serious. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he searched for complaints or reports attached to Reynolds' name. Maya stood still, her sharp eyes watching everything. She had learned over the years that people's true colors showed when they were under pressure. Right now, Reynolds looked panicked, as if she was bracing for something she knew was coming. Within seconds, Harris' expression darkened. "Chief, we have a problem," he said, his tone low but firm. Dawson moved closer to the screen. He scanned the records, his face unreadable at first. Then his jaw tightened. He let out a long breath and turned toward Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds," he said slowly, "care to explain why you have multiple complaints for wrongful stops and aggressive behavior?" Reynolds' mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She swallowed hard. "Those complaints were just misunderstandings," she said quickly. "People like to complain when they don't get their way." Maya crossed her arms. "Or maybe they were right," she said, her voice steady. Reynolds' eyes flashed with frustration, but she didn't dare respond. The weight of the situation was sinking in. Chief Dawson looked at Harris. "How many complaints are we talking about?" Harris clicked through more files before answering. "At least 7 in the past year alone," he said. And those are just the formal reports. Who knows how many incidents were never documented? Maya wasn't surprised. She had worked in law enforcement long enough to know that for every complaint filed, there were likely several more that had gone unreported. Dawson turned back to Reynolds, his face hard with disappointment. "Officer Reynolds, you were given a badge to protect and serve, not to misuse your authority." He let out a deep breath. "Effective immediately, you are suspended while this investigation moves forward." Gasps echoed in the room. Reynolds' face drained of color. "Chief, please." Dawson held up a hand. "You'll have your chance to explain yourself, but for now, you're done." He turned to another officer. "Escort her out." Maya watched as Reynolds, once so sure of herself, now looked small and uncertain. Two officers approached her, guiding her toward the exit. She didn't resist, but the shock on her face was clear. As the doors closed behind her, Dawson turned to Maya. "Agent Carter, I promise you, we will get to the bottom of this." Maya nodded. "I believe you, but I'll also be watching." The chief gave a firm nod, understanding exactly what she meant. This wasn't over. Not yet. The station was still filled with tension, even after Officer Reynolds was escorted out. The officers around the room exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that what had just happened could have easily been avoided. Chief Dawson ran a hand through his hair, his face lined with frustration. Maya remained calm, but inside, she was still processing everything. She had handled many difficult cases in her career, but this felt personal. She knew that if she hadn't been an FBI agent, things could have gone very differently. How many others had faced situations like this, but had no way to defend themselves? Chief Dawson broke the silence. "Agent Carter, would you like to file a formal complaint?" His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe even embarrassment. He knew this incident could damage the department's reputation, but more than that, he seemed to truly care about fixing the problem. Maya thought for a moment. "A complaint isn't enough," she said. "I want a full review of Officer Reynolds' past cases. I want to know how many people she's wrongfully stopped or arrested." Lieutenant Harris nodded in agreement. "That's a fair request. If she's done this before, we need to make it right." Dawson sighed, then gave a firm nod. "You're right. We'll start immediately." He turned to Harris. "Pull all the reports linked to Reynolds. Any case with questionable details needs to be reopened." Maya appreciated the chief's willingness to act, but she wasn't done yet. "This isn't just about one officer," she said, scanning the room. "There's a pattern here. Officers like Reynolds don't act alone. They get away with things because others ignore the signs or look the other way." The room fell silent again. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, while others lowered their gazes. They all knew she was right. Dawson cleared his throat. "Agent Carter, what do you suggest?" Maya met his gaze. "Training. Real training. Not just lectures, but hands-on sessions where officers understand what real policing looks like, where they learn how to handle situations fairly without bias." Harris spoke up. "That could actually work. We've been needing better training programs for a while." Dawson rubbed his chin, considering. "It won't be easy," he admitted. "But if we want to rebuild trust, we have to start somewhere." Maya took a deep breath. "Then let's start now." The chief nodded. "I'll make some calls. But Agent Carter, I want you to be part of this process. We need people like you to help us get this right." Maya gave a small smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As she stood in that station, she realized something important. Change wasn't just about punishing one bad officer. It was about fixing the system so that no one else had to go through what she did. And she was ready to fight for that change. Over the next few days, the police department was busier than ever. Chief Dawson kept his promise and ordered a full investigation into Officer Reynolds' past cases. Lieutenant Harris and his team went through every report linked to her name, and what they found was alarming. Several cases showed the same pattern: wrongful stops, unnecessary arrests, and complaints from people who had been treated unfairly. Many of those cases had been ignored or dismissed in the past, but now everything was being reviewed. Some of the victims were even contacted to share their experiences. Maya watched all of this unfold with quiet determination. She wasn't just here to observe. She was actively involved in the process. She sat in on meetings, reviewed reports, and even spoke to some of the officers about the importance of fair policing. One afternoon, Chief Dawson called a department-wide meeting. Every officer was required to attend. The room was filled with people, some curious, some nervous, and some unsure of what to expect. Maya stood at the front of the room alongside Dawson and Harris. Dawson cleared his throat and began. "We are here today because something unacceptable happened in this department. An officer abused their power, and it wasn't the first time." He scanned the room, making sure everyone was listening. "But we're not just here to talk about one officer. We're here to talk about how we move forward." Maya stepped forward. "Some of you may think this doesn't concern you," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But the truth is, if one officer does something wrong and the rest of the department ignores it, then everyone is responsible." The room was silent. Some officers looked down, while others exchanged glances. Lieutenant Harris spoke next. "We found multiple complaints against Officer Reynolds. Many of those complaints were ignored or not taken seriously. That stops now." Maya nodded. "From this point forward, there will be new training programs. Every officer will go through real hands-on training to understand how to handle situations fairly and without bias." An officer in the back raised his hand. "With all due respect, Agent Carter, not all of us are like Reynolds. Why should we be treated like we are?" Maya met his gaze. "This isn't about punishing good officers. It's about making sure no one abuses their power. If you're already doing the right thing, this training will only make you better. But if there are officers who think they don't need to learn, then maybe they shouldn't be wearing a badge." The officer slowly nodded, realizing her point. Chief Dawson took over again. "These changes are happening whether we like them or not. If we want to serve this community, we have to do better." Maya looked around the room. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a start. And she wasn't going to stop until real progress was made. In the following weeks, the police department began making real changes. The investigation into Officer Reynolds' past cases uncovered even more issues, and the department took action. Some cases were reopened, and people who had been wrongfully arrested finally got the justice they deserved. Meanwhile, the new training program was put into place. Every officer, from rookies to veterans, was required to go through sessions on fair policing, proper procedures, and how to handle situations without bias. Maya was invited to help lead some of these sessions, and she didn't hold back. She stood in front of groups of officers, sharing real stories. Stories of people who had been stopped for no reason, treated unfairly, and left without answers. Some officers listened carefully, while others were more hesitant. But Maya could see that change was starting, even if it was slow. One day, after a long training session, Lieutenant Harris approached Maya. "I have to admit," he said, "when this all started, I didn't think it would make much of a difference. But now, I see it. Officers are thinking before they act. They're being more careful, more aware." Maya gave a small smile. "That's the goal. Change doesn't happen in one day, but step by step, it happens." Just then, Chief Dawson walked in. "Agent Carter," he said, "I wanted to personally thank you. Because of you, we're fixing things that should have been fixed a long time ago." Maya nodded. "This isn't just about me, Chief. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." Dawson crossed his arms. "Reynolds has officially been dismissed from the force, and we've set up a new system where complaints will be reviewed properly. No more ignoring the warning signs." Maya took a deep breath. This was what she had fought for. Not just one officer facing consequences, but a whole system being improved. Later that evening, as she walked out of the station, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She knew the fight for justice never truly ended, but this was a victory. She got into her car and looked at the station one last time before driving away. This was just one city, one department, but it proved that change was possible. And Maya Carter wasn't done yet. There were still many battles to fight, many voices that needed to be heard. But for now, she had made a difference. And that was only the beginning.